The Cincinnati Bengals exited the draft with double dips on day 3, adding some depth to key areas of the roster. Let's talk about the way the Bengals finished the draft in 2025.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Lisco. He's James Rapine, and we've been covering the Bengals here on Locked On Bengals daily since 2016. We've had you covered, of course, throughout this draft. We will be away from you tomorrow if you're looking for a programming update. So since we've covered each day of the draft, we'll take tomorrow off. We'll be back with you on Monday evening, afternoon, and today we're going to talk about how the Bengals finished the draft with double dips, going back to the well at linebacker and the interior offensive line. We'll have some overall thoughts on the draft where it's a mixed bag. It's not black and white to me, James. There's some good, there's some criticism, obviously, and we'll get into those topics. But day 3, I thought, was a pretty solid day for the Bengals overall. I don't necessarily quibble with any of the individual picks to a significant degree. The Bengals add Barrett Carter, linebacker from Clemson, in the 4th round. They add Jalen Rivers, a 30 visit lineman from Miami, in the 5th round. Tahj Brooks, running back from Texas Tech, in the 6th round. And these are all players that you can see how they fit. You can see what their role can be. And they all bring something to the team that is valuable depth at 3 positions, where they go from a whole lot of questions at linebacker and on the interior offensive line and running back, when you're talking about depth, to really deep rooms at those positions.
Yeah, look, they needed more trench help. We knew that. And in offensive line wise, the double dip was always in play. I think that was sort of their plan coming into the draft. They really like Jalen Rivers. But let's start with Barrett Carter, because everyone's going to love the double dip on offensive line because they're offensive linemen. Like Dylan Fairchild has a lot of fans because he plays guard, which I get the guard starvation element of it. And it's going to be the same way with Jalen Rivers. And I get it. And I think both are good players that are going to help the Bengals, by the way. But Barrett Carter, someone that they were considering much earlier. Al Golden said it. And by much earlier, there are worlds where they're considering him at 49 and probably a trade down candidate. Certainly. Now, I don't think it was that realistic that they would have taken him that early, just because of the other guys that were probably and likely in the mix. But when you have a guy graded that highly, even after you take Demetrius Knight Jr., it's it makes sense on day 3. Like, I'm not going to argue with that. And I think some people will see the linebacker and be like, oh well, look, if you had a second round grade on him, he's there in round 4. I'm not going to argue with you. I actually I thought about it the other way. It's like, man, and I know they're different players, and this really is kind of eerily similar to 2020, when it's like you get your Logan Wilson. I know he's not Logan and Demetrius Knight Jr., but you get your Logan Wilson, and then you're still looking for your Akeem Davis Gaither, and in a guy that's going to be able to help in a bunch of different ways. That might not mean special team, or that might mean special teams. That might not mean a huge presence on defense right away. So yeah, I think Barrett Carter makes sense, and it is an example of the Bengals sticking to their board, which I'm not going to argue with, especially on day 3.
I think Barrett Carter is also a guy that is going to have a different role, as you alluded to, than Demetrius Knight. And Al Golden talking about this, and he said essentially that Carter is going to be a backup for Logan Wilson in nickel. Demetrius Knight might be out there in nickel with Wilson, and Demetrius Knight might be a player when they put 3 linebackers on the field and 4 defensive linemen on the field, where instead maybe it's Barrett Carter when they go to a 3-4 linebacker grouping. They put 3 defensive linemen on the field. They put a couple of outside linebackers on the field, which will be their edge rushers. It'll be Trey. It'll be Joseph Osai. It'll be Shamar Stewart, those guys. And maybe they see Demetrius Knight's blitzing ability as a guy that can fill that role as well. And they did this with Jermaine Pratt with Luana Rumo, where Jermaine Pratt would be the 5th guy on the surface sometimes in some of the fronts they would play. And if they see Demetrius Knight as a guy that can do a similar thing as a guy that plays on the surface at times in those 3-4 looks, then there's an idea for how they want to use these different linebackers in various sub packages and different fronts that they want to play. And talking about, their 3-4 grouping versus their 4-3 grouping versus their nickel grouping, and the idea of the role for each of the guys tells you how they're thinking of them in different ways. They didn't draft two guys that are playing the same exact role in the linebacker room in Carter and Knight.
No, no doubt. Certainly different and complement each other. And so I think it makes sense. And again, at that point, it's it's tough because if they had that, if they were thinking that earlier and he's still there and you have this role, well then do it. So I really I don't have any problem with that. I think then you go on to the next pick. And this is someone if they had taken Jalen Rivers at 119 in round four, wouldn't have said much about it. I would have said that makes sense. They've been in on him. He had that 30 visit you mentioned. They talked to him at the combine. They were at his pro day. I mean, they had so many touch points with him. They were interested in Jalen Rivers, and it's because he's what we've talked a lot about the tackle to guard converts. He's a tackle to guard maven. I mean, he's done both and done both at a consistent amount where the snaps are almost identical. Playing tackle versus guard in college. He can do both. He did both in different games. You think about what Cody Ford did last year for the Bengals. Jalen Rivers was asked to be extremely versatile for Miami. And you're talking about a 6'6", 319-pound offensive lineman that took they had him snap at the Senior Bowl, which is kind of funny because I don't think the Bengals really envision him as a center, but it speaks to the NFL and how the NFL viewed his versatility. And I like it. I like in round 5, you get him there, makes a ton of sense. And like Dylan Fairchild, he's known for his pass protection and how well he can pass protect. It's really long arms. He talked about his length. I asked him what he needs to improve on, and it was all about the run in the running game. But from a pass protection standpoint, why have we talked about guard so much? Because the Bengals need to be better at protecting Joe Burrow. They got two guys that are certainly known for pass protecting and holding up, and so Jalen Rivers is certainly someone that I think is going to help and compete. And who knows, maybe you're talking about a swing tackle or a guy that can back up multiple positions as a rookie.
That might be where he ends up. It would be cool to see him in a competition for right guard.
Sure.
He played on the left side in college. So did Dylan Fairchild. So maybe there isn't a vision necessarily for Jalen Rivers to be competing for right guard. We'll see how that plays out. I think he was announced as a tackle. If you read into those things, I'm not sure how
I
much
don't.
that matters or doesn't matter. He's
He-
one of Brandon Thorne's guys, which is always a
yeah,
good sign. Brandon Thorne, a fan there. You mentioned the length, 35-inch arm, so certainly has the length to play tackle if he is asked to be a swing tackle in the NFL. I think a lot of people see him as better suited to guard, including Dane Brugler, including I think Joe Goodberry. And what Dane writes about him is essentially that there's some over aggressive tendencies that lead to balance issues that they'll need to address with professional coaching, but certainly has the strength, has the anchor, has the length, and is a solid athlete to do the things that you need to do to be a good player in the NFL. I think the two interior linemen slash, potentially swing tackle here in Jalen Rivers that they drafted in this draft are some of the better interior offensive line prospects that they've drafted in recent history. They're better than some of the
agreed.
other swings they've taken at this position. And they are bringing these guys into a world where you're asking Scott Peters for the guys that he wants to coach up. And that's been a theme of the entire draft, right? Is Al Golden getting his guys to run his defense, Scott Peters getting a couple of his guys to put in to his system on the offensive line, and Jalen Rivers, the second that they add on the offensive line.
Yeah, he's someone that, and by the way, he does compete at right guard. I don't think they're going to rule that out as of now. It's going to take a lot for him to show that, certainly, but it's good to see them. You mentioned the swing, and I agree. I think you could see it's realistic that Dylan Fairchild and Jalen Rivers could be good players in this league, much like it was with Matt Lee last year. So the last 3 interior linemen that they've taken, and obviously Rivers has some flex, but guys, it looks like it could be realistic to think that they could be actual dudes in this league. which is a heck of a place to be in considering some of the swings and misses that they had in the early part, especially of the Joe Burrow era. But there's plenty to discuss, plenty more probably, maybe some on Jalen Rivers, but certainly Tahj Brooks and overall themes of the draft as well. We'll do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you need right now. Whether it's the NBA playoffs, which are in full swing, whether it's any live event, Reds games, yeah, Great American Ballpark's right down the street from me. I'm at Paycor Stadium right now, and maybe you're wanting to go to a Cincinnati Reds game. Maybe you're thinking about a summer concert or a concert next week. Who knows, right? Gametime is going to make it fast and easy to get NBA playoff tickets, and when demand is sky high, prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. So let's say you know you're going to the Reds game. Doesn't mean you got to get tickets right then. You can get down to the banks. You could have a couple cold ones. You could look at the Game Time app and boom, take advantage of their last-minute deals when you save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
As we get to the 6th-round pick, at this point, I felt like the Bengals had added kind of 4.5 starters, maybe 4 starters in aggregate. Jalen Rivers, I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up starting some for the Bengals this year. You generally get some attrition on the offensive line.
Sure.
He could be put into that role. Barrett Carter, Demetrius Knight both sound like they have some clear roles in mind for Al Golden, or Al Golden has clear roles in mind for them on defense. Demetrius Knight should be a starter right away. Barrett Carter is going to play significant snaps, I think, in certain packages, and we'll see how those guys get on the field. We talked about Shamar Stewart, certainly has a chance to start right away. And I think that's also true for Dylan Fairchild at left guard. I think he's got a great shot at winning that job. So you drafted a bunch of guys at this point that are starting potential players. Despite all of the talk we had about the process yesterday, the upside here is that they've drafted guys that should be able to come in and compete for starting jobs right away. And so despite what you think about the process, I think that they have guys that can contribute early on at positions where they needed contributors. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be issues with the draft here and there, but they added contributors, and I think that's also true of their 6th-round pick that I have no real criticisms of. Tahj Brooks, the Texas Tech running back, a good size speed combo. He's like 5'9", 213. So really good density there, and he ran a low 4.5s, I think 4.5, 340. So great size speed combo there. Has been on the field a ton, similar to Chase Brown in that regard. And I love taking a swing on productive running backs in the 6th round. And like they did that with Chase Brown, and I do think Chase Brown was a better prospect. I like doing that here with Tahj Brooks, who can give you maybe that short yardage role early in his career for the Bengals and can be a 3-down back if needed.
Yeah, here's what's fun about Tahj Brooks is you're right, production. Back-to-back 1,500+ yard seasons, 22 straight games of 95 yards or more rushing. Just slice and diced my Cincinnati Bearcats for 172 yards in a game that I watched that Scott Satterfield was just awful clock management-wise. You want to talk about clock management down the stretch. That's neither here nor there. But, yeah, Tahj Brooks was certainly a standout in that game. And so you're like, oh, okay, so he's just this runner. Caught 20+ passes in each of the past 3 years, is comfortable in the shotgun style, in is someone on the conference call, I brought up to or Ben brought up to him, the style that the Bengals run and how it's gonna be a lot of passing, and he's like, "Oh, yeah." He's like, "I'm comfortable in anything." And he's like, "But I've only been in the I formation like 8 times." And it's like, "Ah, you're not gonna have to worry about that here." So, no, I think that it makes sense. It really does. And the other thing that's really cool is Bengals running backs coach Justin Hill recruited him.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there's that tie. So I saw Justin yesterday in the cafeteria, and we get access. The Bengals are awesome during draft weekend. Media gets access to the cafeteria, so we don't starve to death. So shout out to the Bengals for that. And so I saw Justin there, and I was so tempted to be like, "Hey, when are you getting your running back?" When are you getting your running back, Justin? Because I think it was pretty well known that they were in on running backs. And so to get a guy that he's known for years, you know about the character, you recruited him. It's I think that's pretty cool. So that's a cool little tie. But no, I think he could contribute this year for sure. He's someone that's well rounded enough. And the other note here is despite everything with Zach Moss, Zach Taylor didn't make any declarations and just said that he's progressing. And
Mhm.
so we'll see there, but this is some insurance in that department as well.
And it's not like it's unusual for the Bengals to carry 4 running backs. That wouldn't
No,
be a surprise at all. And if Tahj Brooks comes in
plays
and
well.
he
Yeah.
and he can be that guy that is your short yardage back, say that they really love his short yardage ability right away. And he's good after contact. The leg turn after contact is a consistent part of his game. Good patience, good vision, should be good between the tackles in those short yardage situations. I think he has some, typical college running back tendencies where he can out athlete some guys at that level that he's going to have to get out of in the NFL. You don't want to necessarily be corner shopping at the corner store. That's the phrase that'll always stick in my mind for running backs when they come into the NFL, guys that try to bounce stuff outside and try to turn the corner. And he's not going to be a long speed guy. So the Bengals showed us what kind of running back they wanted here, where they could have gone for a speedier back, but they feel like I guess they have that in Chase Brown and looked for more of a complementary piece for some of the harder work. And the other notes from Dane Brugler's report and others, Eric Galco, I think, talking him up because he was at the Shrine game. Strong batting average and pass pro for a
Mm.
college back. So the ability is there. I think is something that, like most college backs, he will continue to have to work on in the NFL, but has the ability to be a 3-down player. Doesn't have the home run threat kind of speed that Chase Brown has. Doesn't have that kind of dynamism to his game, but as a complementary back who comes from a workhorse background where he's carrying the load at Texas Tech. Adding that kind of player, if he can be that short yardage back, if he can be an efficient back who can spell Chase Brown, that's a
Yeah.
nice piece to have for you in the future. And if you get that in the 5th and 6th rounds in Chase Brown and Tahj Brooks, that's great. Taking
Yep.
late swings on running backs is something that I will almost always be happy to see.
Yeah, especially in this class. I mean, there were so many. I mean,
Mhm.
it's wild to see, like, just to see how many were going off. Cam Scatterbo went off the board, then Jaden Blue, and it's like, okay, well, let's look at this next tier, and then it was like this guy and this guy, and then you could just look up and down. So yeah, Damian Martinez, by the way, a guy that fell far. He had to have medical
Mhm.
flags or something. Ended up going
Mhm.
to Seattle, but the Bengals picked Todd Brooks over him, and so it was a talented class, and you just when it's a talented class in a specific area throughout, especially on day 3. And this is why, again, I can't get mad. I thought the realm to get a linebacker was today. And so you got one today. You got a running back today. And I'm not going to knock that. Regardless of what position you wanted to address, you take a guy that you think can help you now. And Tahj Brooks certainly fits that. I think all of these guys certainly look like you could really paint the picture. You really hope it doesn't happen this way unless they just win out competition wise. But all of these guys, all 6, could come in and contribute in various ways. You don't necessarily want them all, or, the first 5 starting or something like that. But if they earn it, then why not?
There will be starters out of this class. There will be contributors out of this class. That is something that we asked for, and they built depth in some pretty key areas. There's some risk. There's always risk in the draft. We never know how some of these guys will pan out once they get into the facility. Once the coaches get their hands on them, they see how they fit into the schemes. You see how they pick up the technique that they're going to want these players to use. Is maybe going to be a little bit different than what they did in college, and the lifestyle adaptation to the NFL. But I will say this for this Bengals draft class as we shift gears here, James, and we'll start to talk about some of the themes, some of the big picture takeaways from this draft. Now that the Bengals have a complete draft class here, is that these guys are all high character grades throughout the
Mhm.
draft. I think you're in the A to A plus to A plus plus range for players up and down this Bengals draft, and I think that was maybe not necessarily a deliberate point of emphasis, but it is certainly a result, is that they've
Mhm.
got a bunch of guys that are going to come into this team and work extremely hard. And I think that is worth noting as we'll continue to dive into the other themes and takeaways from the overall draft class to finish up this draft weekend coming up next.
The Armada pick of the week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. This week, we're highlighting the top pick from the Bengals draft, the selection that truly stood out, the guy who showcased the strength and power to push the Bengals forward as we look ahead to 2025. In this week's Armada, and clear-cut top pick of the draft is Shamar Stewart. People are going to debate this and be mad or whatever, but he's the top pick. He's the guy that they're coming in. And by the way, we're going to dive into takeaways from this draft. They're banking on him to bring some pass rush juice on the interior, on the edge. They need him to be disruptive, and that is why they picked him. That is why he was ended up being the lone defensive lineman that they added. And so they're banking on Shamar Stewart, and they're going to think that he's going to, well, be heavy duty, rugged, just like the Nissan Armada. It's clear that Shamar Stewart is out here and ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure by shopping nissanusa.com.
James, as you consider this entire draft class now,
Yep.
we know the 6 picks. We've seen the way everything has played out over the last few days. I think character is certainly a theme for me. That's why I mentioned it. That is a theme. What else stands out to you when you consider the way the Bengals went about this weekend?
This is the 2020 draft in a lot of ways. Obviously, not because you're getting Joe Burrow. I don't mean that. But you're right about the character thing. I want to hammer that home. It's very much same theme where it's like, oh, they took another linebacker? That's weird. Like, kind of surprised you a bit. But then you talk to these guys. Like Shamar Stewart's character wasn't a captain, he was a junior, but it was just awesome. Like getting to know him was awesome. Demetrius Knight Jr., Jay Morrison just wrote an awesome piece, Bengals.com, on the second round linebacker, what he did when he was at Charlotte as a father, as a husband, to keep his family afloat while he was still playing college football. And it's a crazy story that everyone should read. And so character A plus plus plus. I'm not sure there are many humans in the league, period, or really in any workplace that are they're at his level or appear to be, given what we know about him. I've had multiple people within the NFL, by the way, reach out to me about Demetrius Knight Jr. Like since we did our last show about how high character he is. So I think he's a pretty unique guy. Dylan Fairchild met him today, and again, seems to be that type of guy. And obviously the 3 guys that we just talked about. So yeah, I think that's the biggest theme of this draft. The other one would be whether it's Stewart, Knight, Fairchild, Carter, Rivers, Brooks, going through each one of them. And Carter would be the one that I guess is the least of this, but he's a linebacker. He's going to have to hit. They're all physical. Like Fairchild, yeah, he loves pass protection, but he's a college wrestler. Demetrius Knight throws his body around. Shamar Stewart does the same thing. Jalen Rivers is someone that likes to use his length and his ability to pass protect at a really, really high level. And most offensive linemen would rather run block. And then Tahj Brooks, you mentioned the leg churn there. So I do think that the Bengals, they're tougher today than they were a few days ago. And I think that matters, especially when you combine that with high character guys. Like if you're talking about guys that are working their butts off and they're tough and they're made of the right stuff, that does go a long way when crap is hitting the fan and your back's against the wall and you need to find a way to make a play to turn the game over. Like that stuff does matter. Now it needs to happen. They need to be talented, all of those things. But I think that's worth pointing out.
I think there's a lot of high floor to this draft too. And Shamar Stewart is seen as this boomer bust type of player. And I think that is true to some degree, but I think his bust is probably like solid role player with the athletic traits that he has. And he will need to improve some things, sure, but I don't think it's setting a pick on fire no matter what. And that's something that I think we got to when they drafted him. There's this risk there, but typically guys with that set of athletic tools, even when they're lacking production, can have long NFL careers. And I think of Jadeveon Clowney here. I'm not comparing.
I thought of Jadeveon Clowney.
I'm not comparing Shamar Stewart directly to Jadeveon Clowney or anything like that. Jadeveon Clowney was a consensus top pick that year. Not as much consensus around Shamar Stewart, but maybe he's never 15 sack player. And maybe he's more of like in the Trayvon Walker mold of development where they put the athletic tools together. He becomes a productive pass rusher, a good player against the run where his athletic tools allow him to play up. There's a high floor there potentially that you could very easily see if the game slows down for him. And you would expect the game to slow down for him. He's still a young player. And so you get him into an NFL system, you can see that clicking. And I
Yeah.
think the same is true for the linebackers they drafted. Again, there's some development required for those offensive linemen they drafted. But when you think about their fit with the Bengals in terms of pass protection, if that's the focus, and it is, you can see that could be a pair of high floor guys as well for where they're drafted. And so
Ye-
that's another theme to me as I think about how these guys fit into the team right away and the impact they can make.
Where's the risk? Like
Like,
there isn't like last year, it felt like there was a ton of risk throughout the draft, like a ton. Like not just Jermaine Burton, but like Jermaine Burton, McKinley Jackson, Eric All. Like for whatever reason, there's all this risk. People thought Amarius Mims was pretty risky. I didn't because it's like because of what you said about Shamar. It's like he's so gifted. Like worst case, he's going to be a pretty good pass protector. Like even if,
and there's similar risk, right, to
yeah,
Amarius and to Shamar Stewart. It's just more easy to articulate because people can look at the sack number and say, well, you look at the sack. And last year for Amarius, it was a snap count, and those were the numbers people talked about.
sir. And so that's what I think this was. This was the high character. Let's reestablish who we are, what we're looking for. That doesn't mean that they weren't going to take a like everyone in the first round had a risk. That like if they had taken Walter Nolan, and I think they probably would have, but if they had, we would be talking like, yeah, high character in rounds 2 through 6, but there's going to be questions about Walter Nolan and how much he loves football and all those. Like, we'd be talking about it. So I think outside of that though, when you look rounds 2 through 6, solid guys chomping at the bit, like really good attitude, super confident guys that should make an impact, that you can see make an impact. And so for the everydayers out there, I get being excited about this draft. There's ups and downs throughout the draft, and it doesn't change what I said on yesterday's show. I still feel pretty the same when it comes to day 2 of this class. But did the Bengals get better? Did they add pieces that are going to help them? They should have. And we'll talk about all of the fallout and things that need to happen and how they're going to be able to maximize these guys and roles and things like that. Plenty of time to discuss that. But high level, if you're talking at the water cooler at the office this week, did the Bengals add multiple starters in this draft? Yes. Did they add high character people in this draft? Yes. Did they add guys that are going to be productive? Yes. And that includes their first round pick because he is a freak. He's an alien that I expect to work really, really hard, that also has great character. And usually those guys pan out. And I felt really similar during the interview process last year was with Amarius because there were questions. Remember, there was like some character stuff too, like how much does he love it and all of those things. And it was like, oh, like is he like that? And then you spend 10 minutes with him and it's like, no, like that's not it. And you talk to people that are around him. And I think the same thing was with Shamar Stewart. Not that there was those kind of questions, but I think he was just so willing to do whatever it took at A&M that was part of it. He'd play inside, he'd move outside, he would do whatever it took to maximize that defensive line. And not everybody that plays defensive end is willing to kick inside regularly. We've seen that in the past, and I think Shamar's going to do whatever it takes to win.
And that's what they need. They were never going to get out of this draft with all of their needs met. We talked about that many times. And the
Yep.
double dips means that there are still some things that you would like to see them do. There are
Mm.
moves, I think, with veterans that you're anticipating, at least for Jermaine Pratt. I think that that move coming anytime once they get these linebackers in the building. And so there's, some discussion to be had about the overall state of the roster. I think when you ask about what kind of risk they took in this draft, when you look back on it, the biggest criticism is going to be that they didn't do the things that the Eagles and the Ravens always do, where they scoop up the fallers and they identify the guys that everyone sees across the league, the wisdom of the masses, as these high-end players that are just tumbling down the draft for some reason or another. There's usually a flag there, whether it's medical or character, whatever it is, and then scooping those guys up. And the Eagles did it this year again. The Ravens did it this year again. And so the Bengals didn't really do that this year. Like you're going to see the comparisons to consensus, and the Bengals are going to have probably one, maybe two guys that represent quote unquote value compared to consensus. And that was our criticism of day two was the approach to round two in particular. But once you see the entire thing and you think about the roles for guys, you can understand the idea here. There's still no pass rushing three tech. Al Golden's talking about defensive ends kicking inside and that being a core tenet of what they're expecting to do in the pass rush. And that's going to be a topic of conversation between now and the regular season. And I think that there's no way around that after this draft. And that is what it is. But they have these players that you can now understand the vision for. And now we see how they work out. And that's where we go from here. We very quickly think about the things that they do well, the things that they need to improve, and that's their college scouting report. And soon enough, you no longer are thinking as much about the reaches, although I do think that the comparisons to the other AFC North teams will persist. I think that those, like, think back to DeCastro and Zeitler, like those sorts of comparisons always persist. But from here, it's okay. They've got the players. Let's see what they do, because from here is where the unknown really exists. You never know how these guys are going to translate in the NFL, no matter who they were. And there's always that bit of transition and seeing what happens there.
Yeah, they need these guys to make an impact right away, and I think that's why. Like, by the way, I in our Locked On Bengals Insiders group found this out this morning, but Locked On Bengals or subtext.com/Locked On Bengals, but Jermaine Burton was in the building today, and I thought that was really cool, and I think that's been a pretty normal thing, and hopefully he develops into something that's going to matter this year. But I think that given what they did or didn't do in free agency, and by the way, maybe it's because they got burned in free agency too with some of these character guys. The Sheldon Rankinses of the world, that didn't work. And it wasn't just because he got sick at one point. It didn't work for a bunch of reasons. And so to kind of reset the character, the culture, and knowing that you got to get immediate contributors, I get that there should be a certain standard from a character standpoint. I totally get that, because I don't think some of the guys, some of those fallers were being considered for character reasons by the Bengals. And so we'll see if it pans out, right? And if they can get what they're looking for out of this draft this season for sure. But the draft isn't just about this season; it's over the next few years, how it works out.
Yeah, and we'll like you said, we'll have to see how these guys play. But they have significantly improved their depth, I think, at linebacker, on the offensive line, with a couple of pieces that you can see the vision for. And at running back, I think adding Tahj Brooks in the 6th round, like I said, never going to complain about that. We talked about day one, day two quite a bit. I think that the questions will always be the what ifs on day two. I think that will be something that sticks with us for a while. But hey, if Demetrius Knight comes in here and he's a 6-year starter and he's an awesome player, and Dylan Fairchild is a long-term starter for you at left guard, then you're probably not thinking about that so much anymore. And you're not asking those what if questions. But that's always what the questions are. There's always an opportunity cost to any pick you make. You're not picking somebody else. And so the players are now selected for the Bengals. And what's left to do is to see how they work out, how things go in training camp, and see what other moves might be coming for the Bengals, either in undrafted free agency or maybe some veteran moves. We'll talk about what might be possible there as well as we take a look at this depth chart post-draft. That's coming your way this week on Locked On Bengals, coming Monday next to anywhere you get your podcasts. Until then, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.